Hello and welcome to Sensing Light, Cognitive Aspects in Human Perception as a Key to Reading Art with Veronica Meerbuck. My name is Dawn Latham, and I'm the IALD Director of Public Policy. Before I introduce the speaker, I'd like to go over some general housekeeping notes. If you have any questions for the speaker during the presentation, please click on the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen to type your questions. We will take questions at the end of the presentation. If you have any technical issues, please put them in the chat function, and an IALD staff member will respond to you privately in chat. Finally, the session will be recorded and available after the conference. Your microphones will be muted and cameras turned off for the duration of the session. Veronica Meerbuck, an architect who has been working as a lighting professional for more than 10 years, has experienced and worked with light in a wide range of projects. Her first encounter with a hands-on approach and as designer and technician in theater and dance lighting, followed by art installations and research projects, alongside architectural and museum lighting, accompanied by university teaching. As a lighting designer and teacher, Veronica is concerned with the extent to which our viewing and perception has already changed in the course of digitalization. Working with light as a medium, she observes and questions what still touches us in the fast-paced world of today. Veronica, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Hello out there. Unfortunately, I cannot see anybody, but you can hear me perfectly as I heard. So I'm talking to myself for the next 45 minutes. This is a live broadcast from Vienna, Austria. We are having a lockdown since 2 days, so I'm sitting in my home working gallery. So hello everyone out there in these strange times. I'm very happy to be here and to give you my lecture. I give you just a short introduction on what I'm doing, what's my background. It was already mentioned before, so I'm running a lighting design office, a technical engineering office, which specialized finally on museum lighting and exhibition lighting. My background is architecture. I'm a studied architect. I also studied dance, so I have a strong background in performing arts and later relation also in theater and lighting techniques. And started my career actually as architectural lighting designer. Also do a lot of teaching, which is always accompanied by professional practice. So what can you expect in the next 45 minutes? So I would like to start with some assumptions regarding the topic of sensing light and the cognition of art perception actually. Assumptions which I gathered for myself during my practice. And then I would like to go in particular in 3 different parts on several aspects of human cognition. I would like to deal with that in terms of the visual field, and in the second part also in terms of embodied cognition. And the third part is dedicated to project practice, as I like to translate things into practice and not just fantasize concepts about it. So I think it's very important to bring things from A to Z, and in the end I would like to finish up hopefully with some conclusions that make sense also to you. So let's start with my assumptions. First assumption, light is movement. So to me, light is also visual echo sounding. Here you see a very first presentation of a very early research project of mine where we were working with lighting sensors mounted at the body, and which were making light audible in real time as light as a medium is surrounding the body in a 360-degree angle. So movement is essential for the visual process, and vision is stimulated by difference in light emissions. So if nothing is changing in our field of vision, our eyes are completely still. So to me, light is a translator between the moving body and the enclosed space. Light itself is always ephemeral. It's constantly in motion. It's traveling. It has a traveling nature. And it's like an echo sounder that makes materiality visible by reflection back to the observer. and it renders the surrounding architecture visible. So light is an ephemeral physical medium that traverses space and time at the speed of light and is both waves and particles. Light is interface, so meaning that seeing is an interactive process. So in my examination of architecture, the relationship between seeing and moving seems to me as one of the most elementary foundations for our understanding of space. So the key to our experience lies in the sensorium of our body, with all its senses. We kind of grope with our eyes and see with our legs. And I also take this approach by a sensorium as a method, also as an idea to understand space from the position of movements. So here you see actually a further development of the project you saw before. The lighting sensors are integrated in the wall and actually are translating colored body shadows of the daylight coming in and are giving like a one-to-one feedback for the people passing by. It's a museum installation in Audioversum. Assumption number 3, light is experience. So I will come later in a much more detailed way to that. British art historian John Berger says the secret was to get inside whatever I was looking at. So this also gives a bit space to the approach of embodied cognition. And regarding to this approach, we as humans only perceive the world at all when we can interact with it. So if I'm looking at this picture and if I'm looking at this person lying in front of it, of course it does something to me, and it does something to the way I'm relating with my body to this setup. So last but not least, light unveils the invisible. As I'm also teaching a lot, I always try to challenge physical and kinesthetic layers within human perception, as they are hardly addressed in classic design education of architecture and lighting design. And to me, these layers are inseparably connected to the embodiment of observations and understanding of light, materiality, and space, and are also crucial for the development of a certain inner design vocabulary as a base for profound design language on the long term. So when I work with students, as you see here, one participant of a workshop, they are always confronted with active physical movement and also in trying to explore the space actually without using their vision. So this was a workshop given at FH Wismar last year. Very last point, light is understanding. So lighting in particular in museums means reaching people within their understanding of the outside world. And in fact, light is decoding our reality. And what I always find very interesting is in museums, to me, they are like spatial laboratories, so in which I immerse the viewer in a work of art through subtle lighting design. And actually the feedback on a spectator's understanding of a space, I can perfectly read from his body language. And if you go back, for example, to Leonardo da Vinci, he already said in his numerous detailed studies of the human body, he stated that movement is an expression of our mental intention. So movement, actions and gestures are also part of our expression for spatial understanding and associations. Plus, it of course makes a difference if I'm alone in space watching something or not. So this just as an introduction. I see some empty slides. Yeah, let's come to part 1. Feel with our eyes. So this chapter is dedicated to the cognitive aspects of visual perception. And I would like to start very basic with the sensitive ganglion cells in the human eye. So what are the human factors in visual perception? So our optic nerve receptors are stimulated by visible light, and the produced response by receptors is kind of relational to the impact of the stimulus. So if it's a very weak stimulus, like for example dim light, the receptors transduce the incoming electromagnetic wave into a less frequent response. But with a stronger stimulus, of course, they respond more frequent. So the capacity of adaptation of our eyes affects our sense of sight. What's interesting is that the main location of our photoreceptive cells lies in the lower part and in the fovea, where I will be talking about during the next slides. So here you see the contrast sensitivity function. As I referred already before, so to me also light is movement in the sense that our eyes are constantly moving. We are shutting down, opening our eyes. So all receptors are triggering change in our eye. And this change is caused by movement or switching off and on light. So our vision is sensing a change and not a static situation. So if you would gaze on an unchanging scene without moving our eyes, the scene would fade, leaving us unable to see what is in front of us. So static change and saccadic movement are also interesting and related, since in a static environment, our movement through space, turning heads, swiveling eyes, results in a constantly changing view, evoking contrast in the scene and triggering on-off changes of the receptors. So even if we feel, for example, motionless, our eyes continue to produce these unconscious tiny movements to fake actually a change and to activate the receptors. So, and within this curve, it's very interesting, at what point of indifference you start to not see anymore or don't perceive any kind of change. So, cartography of cognition. So, cognition is very much based on our context, on our field of vision. And for example, if we take our perception of the brightness of any kind of light stimulus, it's related to the difference to the background illumination and our level of adaptation to the background. And also, if we talk about detection of details, and there we're also talking again about the fovea. So if our eyes want to resolve or find detail, a lot of light must be gathered. So the limiting factor of the resolution of an eye is the number of the receptors available. So we have about 120 million receptors in our eyes, and parts of them are really densely packed, but in the fovea we only cover 1.5 degrees of our visual field. So if you would compare our visual field, which is circular, with the visual field of a Neanderthaler. Oops, I'm sorry, just left out the presentation for some point. Okay. So if we compare our fields of vision with the field of vision of an animal, we have a circle of fovea. If we talk about the biology of visual rejection on art, we can see that the coarse image components on the left, the medium sharp image components, and the fine details actually refer very much to the layers of light that we set in a museum lighting for a painting. So regarding this fact, I think it's very interesting to consider that we're still basically Neanderthalers regarding our visual capacities in the field of vision, and even if we are living in a very digitalized and medialized time. So, oops. Sorry, my picture just didn't show up. So, questioning if an empty view picture is viewed evenly. So if we start to address the topic from another point of view, I mean, we don't need to always look at a painting or an object involving certain issues of attraction or meaning or memory or association. We can also question like, okay, what's happening if we are watching something empty? So it's interesting to think about a viewing direction. So usually we would assume that the viewing direction would happen in our cultural region from left to right. But in recent researches of empirical image science, this cannot be assumpted anymore like this. So it has been established that the picture is not viewed along a line, as originally assumed, but that the gaze explores the picture jumping spontaneously in leaps and bounds regarding to fixing more and more points of greater attraction in the process. So if we go on and see what could be the general focus of our attention, and if we compare our viewing directions, for example, with a still life and a heat map of our circadian movements, and here we see the same still life on the left side in the original and on the right side in the horizontal mirrored version, then we can see that the left and the right half are viewed differently, since due to the laterality of our brain. So the left hemisphere, who is getting images, is processing language and logical thinking. And the right hemisphere is processing spatial perception and emotion. So also interesting on what kind of address in our brain the image goes. So if we're talking about the general focus of our attention, so here you can see again what happens if you're getting an image, which is of course always and has the center is given more attention because of the in comparison to the surrounding area, since the lateral crossing of the way the images are processed in our brain. So thinking about the viewing direction, the left and the right half of the picture are viewed differently, of course, as mentioned. Also distribution of attention and general focus. There's a very strong attraction of the central field of the picture. Also as since there's always the views crossing in the middle while walking, since it's the center of our focus perspective visual field. Interesting thing is also the fovea centralis, which has the highest density of ganglion cells in the center, and of course is decreasing towards the periphery, and therefore is disproportionately large represented in the visual center. So once we are grabbing a center point and a very sharp focus of attraction, we really stay and stick with that. So coming back to visual appearance, this is just a simple picture of an advertisement. So questioning like what is moving us, what is significant, and how do we choose what's important? And this can be general questions, but they are also very relevant for museum lighting and lighting design in general. So if we go a little further and look at the systematics of the eye movement, maybe from a more psychological, a developmental psychological perspective, then we can see there is a certain choreography of gazing something or watching something. So first we start, and you can try also yourself on the side with the figure. First we start to unconsciously wander, just in general to get a peripheral overview. So this is a very raw resolution of color and lighting structure within the field of vision. And it's essential for orientation, so the opposite would be a tunnel view. Then we check the first significant context of the meaning. We recognize, okay, it's a woman, it's a dress. Then the spectator chooses to direct the gaze to a significant event. That can be a detail, that can be a button, that can be a hand, that can be the belts. And what's interesting, that's again what I mentioned before. This is this center point, the focus within foveal center of the retina. We are really entering the spectator's awareness. So this is a moment of absolute getting conscious. So I really see what I see, I got it. And the interesting thing is that humans can learn to identify significant events within a perceived color lighting structure in only 300 milliseconds. And it's pretty fast compared to scanner. So what happens next? We activate the mirror neurons when evolutionarily vital individual meanings are recognized. This can be faces, hands, eyes, genitals, or sexual meanings. And then, of course, we have to think about the attention span. So, and the attention span is definitely determined by the key stimuli. So, our eyes are triggered by something which is most exciting, as we are speaking of the old Neanderthaler, which we are still, yeah. That we developed for run or flee in front of dangers, and are really sensitive to movement. So, and also to social things, which could be like interpersonal communication via eye, hand, gesture, facial expression. This is always understood, and it absolutely doesn't matter from which cultural background we are, either if it's somebody from the Eskimo tribe or somebody from the equator zone. So that's to the general visual part. Let's enter quickly the second part, where I'm questioning a little more how we process things, or how we read things when we watch them or when we view them. So the vision and language, content and meaning. So seeing and language, there's a certain riddle of phenomena, and I really like to quote here an Austrian poet saying, "Reading what has never been written." And I like to show this picture here. It's an Austrian artist. His name is Stefan Draschan, and he does a lot of photo series where he's showing people matching artwork. So there are many series of his photos happening in museum, where accidentally people are standing in front of artworks, and he somehow brings them into a certain context. Why am I showing this? Because it's very much about context. It's very much of how much I see of a picture to establish certain rules or relations between elements, between the structure of a background, between the hair, between the pattern of a trouser. So, and this opens up the topic of context and of comparison. And memory, and coming back to John Berger, which I was quoting already before. So John Berger was a British writer, painter, and art critic, and he described the perceived phenomena when he was talking about photography, and this I think is very interesting, as coherent and subsequently meaningful. So he's talking about the cognition as a form of recognition, which is definitely also fed by memory, and the comparison with the familiar or already experienced. So, of course, we are looking at something and we are trying to make sense of it. And we are forming visual affinities, formed by the same laws of structure and growth, for example, the similarity of the boulder to a mountain, or grass that grows like hair, etc. So, John Berger is also speaking of the interrogation of appearances and the getting into what you see, which also outlines a certain kinesthetic aspect, which I will go more into detail a bit later. Yeah, it's here. So when interrogating appearances, the getting into what you see, how he describes it, outlines also this kind of very big kinesthetic aspect as part of the visual cognition. So how would you look at this picture without having the figure lying in front of it? And just to open up the general question, how we create meaning and how we interpret and how we decide what's important and what parameters lead to a certain context. So the picture I'm showing you now is a still, actually it's a video still of a very interesting project funded by the European Union. It's called Dancing Museums, which is inviting dancers and choreographers into museums to interact with the exhibited artworks. And here you see the choreographer and dancer Lucy Suggett in the National Gallery of London. And yeah, to me it perfectly sums up why museums are interesting places to study and also laboratories for light and movement. And I just quickly switch to show you a short sequence of the movie. There you go.
How does being touched enable a different kind of looking? To receive touch starts to flatten out the hierarchy of the senses. Sometimes you just want to look at a painting, supported or uninterrupted looking. Can you see through the body? Can you see through your skin? What does it feel like to receive the force, the weight of somebody requesting or inviting people to notice how the soles of their feet feel when they're walking through the gallery, or to notice how the air or the atmosphere feels in the gallery as it brushes past your own skin. And there was something about potentially when the touch became more vigorous or into a push, and what happens when you accelerate that, the heart rate goes up, you're breathing, you take in more oxygen, you can feel the blood going around your body, you begin to interrupt a tune of quiet and contemplation.
The children just rest like that.
I put my glasses on because I don't see the children.
Ah,
Okay, let's see.
yeah, I just wanted to show you that we can't.
So to come back to the presentation, this was a very interesting example of actually what's the difference between dance and visual art. And in a museum, actually it's the fourth dimension. It's the moving in space and time, and not in just 2 dimensions or 3 dimensions, if you talk about sculpture. So this is opening up the kinesthetic experience, which is also a very, very big and important part of our experience, and which is very, very unconscious. So talking about developmental psychology and the very early childhood, it's always a question of viewpoint, how we are resonating on built space. So the entire human being and behavior can always be traced back to its inner laws and to relationships between the human body and the surrounding space. So to perceive means to locate oneself in space in a permanent way and in a new way, and to displace the position of the own body in relation to the surrounding space and check this relation again and again and again. And everybody knows this little toddlers crawling, toddling around, getting into these kind of explorative states. And so already in infancy we learn to grasp, to walk, to run, to explore the near and the far sense, the experience and feel of spatial distance. So so it's also the sense of time, and again I'm talking about the fourth dimension and the aspect of mobility which come into play. And to sum this all together, our perception is inseparable from our actions. So there's a very strong connection between the relation, the development of the brain and movements, and also the connectivity between emotion. Since without a constant flow of information between man and his environment, there would be no effective action directed towards the environment. And so in order for learning processes, our perception system has to get going into an active motoric confrontation with the environment. So where does this lead? Linking it back to the aesthetic experience, and coming back to the little Neanderthaler, which we are, aesthetic experience is a primal human drive. So on the left side, you see a small little guy, absolutely artistic, involved in stirring probably his dinner or lunch, I don't know. But it's very interesting that if we would formulate it scientifically, that the beginning of the early human form of drawing and pictorial creation lies in the encounter of a dynamic of movement with a surface that captures this dynamic. And that's exactly what it is. And it's this primal human drive to express oneself, not only in words but also in pictures. And this aesthetic appreciation is something that grows and is a certain mode of experiencing the world and oneself in relation to one another. And it's only through this motor activity of the hands, and that's the smallest scale where we are starting. And there I'm again on feeling with my eyes, on feeling with my hands, because this very early movement of the fingers and hands and this multisensory experience of the material, the surfaces, this can be felt haptically and sensitively. And this kind of tactile stimuli animates the aesthetic experience. So the following patterns of movements and action associated with tapping, index fingers, then we have this pincet grip, which is actually the precondition to later hold a pencil, and also very important, the fingertip. And you see on the left side, you see painting postures of the hands of Bruegel. This was part of an exhibition at the Artistic Museum in Vienna. And also again on the right, a visitor reaction on a painting where we again, we have this fingertip, which is very important. And with this kind of movements, where the early child is like scribbling and discovering, we are exploring with the sensory motor experiences also spatial orders, geometry, lines, graphical forms. So this is actually a very early basis. And even when we are as adults later and we start to have to learn, for example, a drawing program on a computer, we get back to this fingertip. So this is a very deep connection. Coming back to art and kinesthetic experience, as mentioned, paintings are statics. We can say they're two-dimensional, sculptures are maybe three-dimensional, dance is four-dimensional. What happens in, if we look at neuroaesthetics, is that the visual motion is stimulated in the visual field. So when we watch, for example, a painting of Pollock, we also recreate unconsciously the movements, how he was making this painting. And that's actually a very interesting correspondence. And these watched movements, and this is also referring to dance or to other people, or if you would have participated in one of these, for example, dance in museums, workshops, you would have moved through a gallery and your whole perception of paintings would have changed, because you would start to recreate and to recreate the watched movements, since they produce motor resonances in the spectator's brain. And then again, you're simulating on your own what the person is doing. So actually, and that's the concept of embodied cognition, is that actually we are simulating what we are seeing. Yeah, that's an interesting connection. So coming to context, and back to the museum background, the classic museum background, architectural lighting background. This is a table from a very interesting article of Thomas Schielke, where he is naming 3 factors that can be used as criteria, as coming back to the architectural setup with lighting concepts in museums. So the formal aspects, the image medium, and the spatial and temporal surroundings where the work was created. He even goes one step further, outlining 5 different strategies or of methods of display, which bring a different context to a painting or a work of art, ranging from objective reception to subtle emphasizing, dramatical display and magical illumination, hyperrealism and dynamically communicating exhibitions. So let's stick a bit with the question of context and perspective. Rushing to the end of the lecture, the following project examples outline some different approaches to museum lighting and also the attempt to look behind the scenes by decoding effects of lighting and color rendering. My introductory question is how do we look at an artwork from the perspective of a curator, an art historian, a restorator, a visitor, a lighting designer, or even from the perspective of an artist? Light is interpreting, and if we refer to the use of light as an artistic expression, as it is used in theater or performing arts, we are actually translating an artistic context of free choice with light. So here you can see different lighting scenarios as sort of reenactment of visual interpretations of existing artwork. So the left work is referring to the hell scenery of the World Cup triptych of Hieronymus Bosch. It's a piece by Georg Blaschke. On the right side, you see the piece Judith, where we designed an interactive lighting concept with portable luminaires, aiming to remodel the lighting scenarios from paintings within the contemporary choreography context of this piece, which was referring to the Judith myth. And it was pretty interesting to bring these things alive on stage in a totally different context. So coming back to the more classic exhibition context, a light is subtly guiding our views when we walk through an exhibition. So it secretly tells us where to look next. Here you can also see 2 different examples of exhibitions. Left side is Albertina, Vienna. Right side is Ada Aliev Center in Baku. If you look at the left side below, this is an exhibition of Sonja Gangl in Albertina some years ago. And her artwork is spray pencil on paper, surrounded by large paper passepartouts. So you see these absolutely photorealistic drawings of female eyes, are pencil drawings. So we have in this space a lot of different tones of gray. And as we all know, gray can be mixed from different pigments. So it will highlight the off-white pigments within the paper white pretty extreme. And the problem is every paper had a little bit different color. So we had greenish papers, pinkish papers, more warm white papers. So within this particular color setting, they would just light out as if I would have had a spotlight on them without aiming so. So how could we solve that actually? So the background gray is accentuated by the wall washing. So it's a pretty cool white tone. Then we had a second layer of light, which was just framing the passepartouts and the off-white with a correcting factor. So here we added actually a corrective layer. And then in the end, we were still trying to highlight the center picture, the charcoal paintings, drawings with another layer of light, so that they, of course, had to seem evenly accentuated all over the place. So this subtle gradation of intensity creates an illusion of a very even and natural lighting design. But in fact, this lighting is very much related to the artwork and the use technique of the picture. So on the second side, you see an exhibition of George Kondo happening in Ada Aliev Center. So here, this is another example. Here followed a different approach because we had restricted amounts of lamps and different color specters available. So the way shadows are placed are harmonized with viewpoints or dramaturgical lines of the neighboring artwork. So I would call this as an example of at times more dramatic, at times more subtle referential illustration. So this example makes very clear how important the textures and colors of floor and background walls actually are, even if it doesn't look like. So coming back to a historical architectural context, here you can see a workshop results, a workshop I co-organized together with the Via Verlag and also Consuline from Italy. It was happening in the Art History Museum in Vienna, the painting gallery, and participants, like professional lighting designers, have been invited to elaborate during 2 days of workshop lighting designs for pretty known artworks, as we are standing here in the Rubens Hall of Painting Gallery. So you see the displayed paintings in the left side and the standard illumination of paintings on the right side. And these displays have been, these designs have been on display for 3 weeks. So visitors were allowed to vote, to give their opinion. There were voting boxes where they could choose their favorite design. And it was interesting, the result, in fact, since Vienna has a pretty conservative, what I would say, visitor type. So actually the result was 50-50. The 50% really hated it because it was changing their habits. Like it was, they expect to come to the painting hall, and then there's this overall illumination, and there's a very even illustration of the artworks. And the other 50%, they totally liked it, that it was totally different and very individual, and that they could emphasize in different ways with different artworks. And I'm just referring to one feedback note of obviously a faraway traveler or tourist who was writing, people come from far away to see this, so don't fool around with the lighting tricks. So don't fool around with the lighting, let us see the work without lighting tricks. And that just is for me a super interesting question. So what are you referring to? What are you used to? Are you used to, probably as in this museum before, very, very old and bad fluorescent lighting ceilings, which gives a very greeny, gloomy overall lighting, but that's how you like it. That's how you know it. So that's why a change is also an offense. So yeah, that just to bring along this question of context and visual habit. If we go more into detail, I would like to think about light as a medium. So light is an interface, you can say, between space and material. So it's not only a design medium, but also perhaps a rather underestimated addition to the catalog of methods of restoration. Why am I saying this? Because we had the chance to execute 4 days of lighting studies at the world called Triptych of Hieronymus Bosch. It's a very renowned and famous artwork. There are only 3 triptychs of Hieronymus Bosch. So one is owned at the Vienna Academy of Fine Arts. And the former director was really very generous that we had the chance to just spend 4 days with a picture. I mean, if you know and you come from museum lighting, you never have this time. I mean, that's absolutely luxurious. And afterwards, at the SRIL Institute and the Nijmegen University of the Netherlands, they executed really, really detailed studies of a really, really long time of the artwork. So we are still waiting for their final results to actually overlay it with our findings. But I can already give you a glimpse of what we found out, but let's see what they still say. What was the asset of our studies? We wanted to examine the impact of the artificial lighting on the artwork. So we wanted to identify optimal sources, directions, beam angles, positions of luminaires, and also for us, subjectively, best visual rendering. Also as an informing base for a later lighting concept, because I was contracted to do that also. We were also experimenting with colored light to explore the effects on the appearance and the spatial composition. And what's to know about this painting? It's incredibly dense and very, very rich oil and wood painting divided into 3 tables. And it thematizes the evil side, the sins, and it's basically a trip through hell. So it's very rich and dense. The spatial hierarchy is starting with figurative personas and a lot of creatures, giving in the middle ground more architectural structures, and is ending in a vast, very, very dark volcano, lava-like, or let's say hellfire landscape, and is overruled by a blue skylight with other characters. So it's a very interesting composition. So within our studies, we aim to try to keep inside the lux limit, of course, of 150, maximum 200, to avoid a reflection of the shiny top coat, because the picture has been covered in the 50s with a really, really shiny top coating. So to light it, you really, really have to aim very steep and calculate the refraction angles. Also, the yielding of the wooden tables has been a big factor. We'll come to that later. So what did we find out here? Here you see a comparison of 4,000 Kelvin on the left side, 3,000 Kelvin with a skin tone filter, and 3,000 Kelvin on the right side. So you see how deep the impact is of activation of different color pigments and what it does to the spatial rendering of this picture. Also on the right side, we were just overly, very roughly experimenting, like what happens if the center is more cold than the background, or vice versa. If the background is cold and the center is more narrow, of course, this is much more referring to the biological rendering of warm and cold colors for the human vision. But here you see already the different impacts. What we also found out, which is pretty interesting, and particularly because lighting a very, very dark area in the middle of a piece is kind of tricky. So on the left, you see a version, since we're also like referring to HMI and halogen sources, and we're all documenting that. So you see a halogen lighting effect on the central table. And you see how it's emphasizing the red pigments and that the black almost goes into red with deep, deep contrasty shades. And of course, there's less green-blue rendering. On the right side, in comparison, we a really, really cold LED lighting, coating light. So we had a measurement of 5,000 Kelvin, almost a less good color rendering. Of course, paler colors, and what's interesting that the shades get less deep. So the black is lacking depth. And that's actually what was super interesting for us to find out, that actually the cold color temperature obviously is activating this kind of blue pigment or a kind of whitish overall top coat. We're not sure yet. We're waiting the results of the SRAL to make the hell appear much brighter. And so if you would take a colder color, you would totally change the architecture of the picture. On the left side, you see as the studies going on from SRL, they also found some underpaintings, which we could also already outline a little bit with lighting effects. But as mentioned, we still have to wait their final publication. Here you see just a little detail to give an idea how dense this picture is. Like Bosch was a former book painter, so his creatures go really into minimal detailism. So it's really, really interesting to see the fineness and density and structure of the painting. So what did we take then to the final realized lighting design? So the position in the new place was kind of challenging, because it's a 360-degree position of the artwork. And so we had pretty high demands concerning glare, reflection, and surface damage. So what we tried is that we actually, first of all, you see actually the refraction angles we had to calculate, and also because of the yielding of the tables, we had to shoot from pretty far away to really balance that. And what we really tried is that we tried to activate the pigments behind the damaged overall top coating. So we got we were not trying to light the damages, but we tried to light the pigments and the scenery behind, so that the deeper layers of the pigment. And actually that worked out pretty well because of the 360 situation. Of course, we had to change again the vocabulary of sources. So even if the pre-studies informed us a lot, which sources would have been perfect, in the end, it's all a question of reality. As it is always in exhibition context, you always have to face the situation just how it is, and also which available material you can get. So we ended up using smaller sources with a recessed lens technology, because that was the only way to get rid of the glare, which meant we had to use smaller beams. We had to stack them. And actually we tried to follow the compositional lines in the picture, and also to accompany this kind of composition with subtle differences in lighting and illumination, with subtle differences in color shading, and also subtle differences in brightness. So for example, the first row of figures, we really tried to emphasize with a little more radiosity and a skin tone. Second row as well, skin tone, but a little less radiosity. Middle parts, just very warm white to really get out the red-green contrast. And then the upper part of the thing, oh no. Okay, I just tried to go on. Let's see. Yeah, so we tried to follow this gradation in a very different way. So to smoothly follow the architecture of the composition of the artist. Yeah, the result was really, really positive. People liked it. And also what's interesting, if you see the juxtaposition with a much, much brighter illuminated, so the difference is at least 100, 150 lux. Since it's a contemporary oil painting, which has been using even neon colors, the vis-a-vis Bosch triptychum can absolutely cope in regards of visual presence and intensity. Even we are like 100, 150 lux less bright, so you wouldn't notice the difference. So again, it's a lot of it, I think, about yeah, the context and the way you deal with an artwork. So coming to another example of a more artwork-related lighting design, this is the Cornelius Vermeyen cartoons in the Artistium Museum. It's large-scale gouache paintings on paper, which show war sceneries of the Tunis wars. It's pretty interesting. The spatial situation is pretty unique. So you have left and right these huge vitrinas of large-scale drawings. You walk in the middle of a battlefield, which is pretty interesting, also in terms of movement and perspective. And the interesting thing is that on eye height, you have this really lifelike figure sizes. And towards the end, the pictures dissolve in really detailed illustrations of landscape and topographical studies. So what did we do? Of course, we first changed the indirect lighting situation of the hallway, which is definitely necessary to get rid of the glare. Secondly, we tried to find our light source, which gave us an overall, pretty even overall shading of the picture and activation of the red pigments. Secondly, we were adding the centers and also the upper corners, which was crucial to for the visitor to feel actually the edge of the picture and to really understand also the compositional architecture of the whole tableau. And then we added also, depending the point of views of curators and also restaurators, which pieces we should a little highlight. So we got overall a layer of 30 lux, but also a certain meandering plasticity, because it's not 100% homogeneous. But that's also good, because it's actually stimulates the eye, and you see how vivid this picture is looking by only having 30 lux. And people really responded super good to it. They started to bring their friends. They just took a lot of cell phone pictures. They started to really follow the things and stepped away and stepped in front. So really could see they were engaging with the artwork. So coming closer to the end of my lecture, and I really have to hurry up, I would like to zoom out from the artwork-related impacts of lighting to the outer contextual frame of the exhibition set. So which is providing the surrounding lighting context by means of architectural lighting. So this project example uses plasticity as a visual reference. It's the renovation of the lighting ceilings in the Art History Museum in Vienna, which we started in 2017. So it's still ongoing, as there are 10 painting halls. It's pretty big. As already mentioned before, within this spatial concept, the key was to create a new and pleasing visual context and point of reference for the visitor. The design goal was to create a special interplay of light and material, creating a certain plasticity similar to daylight entering the room. So it was crucial to understand the LED luminaires and the glass as one luminaire. We had a lot of sample testing, so it took pretty much time to really find the right level of diffusion and translucence and opacity of the glass. But now if you look up, you really have this little moving effect, and people always think it's daylight coming in, even if it sometimes is, as it's tunable, it sometimes doesn't have the correct color, but they just feel it as it would be daylight because of the diffusion, and we are very proud of that actually, because it was a long process. And also in these very special areas for particular exhibitions, we can like program the ceiling in different groups to also create either to adapt to the exhibition design, so only light parts of it, or to really try to simulate side light or directional sunlight falling in, and also to take a lot of different colors if we need to and want to. Finishing up with another architectural museum project dealing with the choreography of views. So the Künstlerhaus Vienna is a pretty multidimensional museum. It was a restoration and renovation time of 3 years. It is shared by 2 very different institutions. At one hand, the famous Albertina. On the other hand, the Künstlerhausverein, which is one of the oldest artist associations of Austria. So these 2 parties, they use their exhibition spaces pretty different. So we tried, as the architects wanted to have a really solid and geometrically reduced formal channel system. So we really tried to develop a channel system which could actually display, like combine wall flooding, floor lighting, and also individual accent lighting for different artworks, because the exhibition sets are super different. There's also, it's possible to add event technology in certain spaces, and also there's a connection to the ventilation system, and it's also offering space for loudspeakers and hooks. So yeah, it's a pretty interesting system which has been realized. In general, the project has been pretty expensive. I think it was 52 million. So we also had a lot of customized lighting design or luminaire development to harmonize with the historic architecture. So coming to the end, rushing to my conclusions, light is moving. It's an ephemeral medium and electromagnetic wave. Light is detected as movement, so it's our sense of change in human vision. Light creates movement. If we're thinking about the eye, our eyes are constantly moving. Then light creates movement. If we're thinking, I just said that, then light can evoke movement of the spectator. So guiding views, position and engagement of space, choreography of views, of course, we could scale it up to the parties who are designing as well, the exhibition environments. Then light follows movement, and in the end, that's also my final conclusion, that light follows movement. So there's a motor resonance in our brain, which is recreating detected actions and gestures. And it's not only the interpretation of a scene gesture, but also the creational act of creating an artwork. So I would like to close with the suggestion that I think there needs to be a parameter of motor resonance in visual stimulation, which should be also considered as a quality parameter in lighting design. Yeah, I think that's it. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Veronica. That was really fascinating, and particularly how you emphasized how important the aspect of movement is within human perception and how lighting can impact that. We do have a question for you from Katja. who says, "Hi, Veronica, wonderful presentation. Thank you very much for sharing all those insights. Could you please comment on the role of color of the light? Does it affect the cognitive aspects in reading art, from color temperature to actual color light?" And then the second part is, have you ever used color in an exhibition in collaboration, of course, with the artist?
Sorry, I couldn't hear that. There was it was just a connection a bit
Okay.
gross.
So it says, could you please comment on the role of the color of the light? Does it affect the cognitive aspects in reading art?
Absolutely. It's. I just go back to a certain slide. Give me a second. Da-da-da-da. It's very slow. Yeah, definitely, color is a very important factor, and I mean, there have been many lighting designers active in museum lighting, and if you're coming from not just, as a lot of technicians do, they come from theater and lighting, so we're used to building up. We are building up from darkness to set up certain designs and effects. But if you're dealing with an artwork, I think the first thing has to be really honest. So what do I have here? What's the material? What's the pigments? That's very important. And what's definitely what are my protection levels in terms of intensity limits, but also to have a close-up look, to have this double view of observation. So on one hand, what does it need? Or how is the composition? How many cold pigments do I have? Are there certain layers of color, of pigments? Is it oil? Is it gouache? Is it a drawing? So it is definitely, in particular in figurative artworks, it's very important. If you think about the aspect of warm and cold as foreground, background perception, which we do have as human beings. This is also like physiologically proven, I guess, meanwhile. I heard a very interesting lecture of that 2 weeks ago, that literally how the light comes in the eye and how it splits and how it comes back. The warm pigments really arrive first, so it's also in our cognition. It makes more sense that something warm is nearby and closer. So I think this can be needs to be a definite needs to be an effect, needs to be considered. And if you're thinking about for example, this picture here, I don't know if you see my mouse, but on the right side, these two wings of the outer sides of the altarpiece of Bosch. Here you see it's not really matching. The left side has some 3000K in the foreground and some bluish ground lighting, and the right side is actually vice versa. So it's a lot about these switching things, and the question is very much, what does the artwork need? How's the context? I mean, here you see in the testing situation below, we have a green background. If I scroll back to this slide, you see that we have a gray background, for example, at the Kunsthaus Graz, which is the very last thing. Or here we also have a gray background. That depends very much what's the color of my background. How is the gray composed? Is it a red-green composition? Is it a complementary color composition? Or is it really a white, a precise grayish tone gray? Because whatever I see in the background is creating a visual context, and it will activate the pigments in the pictures I hang on this wall. So what we are not really considering, if we, for example, we have a white exhibition space, that actually it's much more about the darkness of the pictures than the opposite. If you have this kind of classic dramaturgical obscure lighting with a black or dark environment and just the framed out pictures, then it's much more about the radiance of the pictures. But if you have a gray tone in the background, it depends very much the spectral composition. I hope that answered it. I'm sorry, it was a bit longer.
And I think we have time just for the second part of her question, which is, have you ever used color light in an exhibition in collaboration with the artist?
Oh, I did. I did. Unfortunately, didn't add this picture to the presentation. It was for the opening of the Künstlerhaus exhibition. There was an installation of an artist, and she was using a yellow carpet and yellow furniture. And I was just suggesting, hey, let's just drop the space in yellow as well. So we added into the architectural layer of the museum lighting, we added certain gels, so that there was the impression as if the yellow floor would radiate up and reflect up onto the walls. So we did that, and also within the fine art lighting, it's always good to let's say, to countershot a picture or a painting, to also give an input of complementary pigments, either in a diagonal or because it's just activating. It's just activating the visual impression. So, I mean, meanwhile, in former days, we were still really using gels, but meanwhile, of course, lighting industry has made its way. So there are filters, there are also like LED compatible filters, there's tunable white. So there are many different means to do that.
Well, thank you very much. That was a fascinating lecture, and we're very pleased to have you present for us. And so we'll end now and remind people to go to the Coffee and Connect and catch up with your friends and meet them.
I will. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye from Vienna.